to worldwide wisdom. So what is the secret to success? What is the secret to success? Oh, being born with rich parents. Someone said to me, you know how you become a millionaire? The easiest way to become a millionaire is to marry a billionaire.
No, it's like I got married and my wife made me a millionaire. The problem is I was a billionaire.
Right. Right. So what does the Torah have to tell us about the secrets to success? And this is a very serious question. If you had to share with your grandchildren the advice, your mentees advice, and what it is that it would take, I'm just curious to know what you would share.
Be true to who you are and never give up.
True to who you are and never give up. Anybody else?
Give your best attitude and way approach to going at things.
What was that?
Give your best effort.
Give your best effort. Okay, fine. Anybody else?
Surround yourself with good people.
Surround yourself with good people. Okay, this all these make sense.
One more.
Yeah.
Know that you are enough, and that comes from God.
Know that you are worthy, that you're enough, and that comes from God. So in other words, don't experience an inferiority and insecurity complex. Okay. Now, all of these are logical, rational reasons, explanations that can motivate success. However, I have to tell you that in today's Torah portion, the Torah makes mention of none of them. The Torah makes mention of none of these. What the Torah does tell us is a very surprising pathway, a very surprising secret to success. And we do this by encountering the most successful person in Jewish history. Who was the most successful person in Jewish history? Why Joseph?
Because he endured the hardships. He always stayed positive, and he knew that no matter where he was in God's hands, and he always had a good.
The reason I say that Joseph was so successful is because the Torah testifies that he was successful more than the Torah testifies about anybody else in history. So when the Torah says that this person was successful, you got to listen. Let's take a look at how the Torah says that. The first one is, here it is, page 243. Page 243. Remember, what the way the Torah portion starts is that Joseph is 17 years old, and he's having these dreams that irk his brothers, because he tells his brothers about his visions of greatness and how they're all going to bow down to him. Then they get angry and they try to kill him. They eventually sell him as a slave, and he gets sold down to Egypt. And they take his multicolored coat, dip it in the blood of a goat, and they show it to their father. And they said, "Look what we found. It seems like a wild animal has devoured Joseph." And of course, Jacob, the father, is bereaved. Now, interesting, by the way, the Torah tells us that Jacob's bereavement never ceased. And from here we learn Jacob understood that Joseph was actually alive. How did he know that? Because there's a rule in mysticism, in spirituality, that the dead are slowly forgotten from our hearts. But if they're not forgotten from our hearts, if we can't get past the grief, it means that they're not actually dead. That's interesting, right? So the fact that Jacob was inconsolable over the passing or over the disappearance of Joseph was proof to him that he was actually alive and he never gave up. He actually told his sons later on in the portion, next week's Torah portion, when there was a famine in the land of Egypt, he says, "I sense that there's hope in Egypt." I don't know if it's appropriate to say double entendre, like a double intention, right? That he meant not only in reference to the famine, but also in reference there might be hope in Egypt to find our long lost sibling and son, right? So take a look at what happens when Joseph now finally surfaces in Egypt, page 243. Middle of the page. Joseph, it's verse 1. Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and chief of his butchers, a prominent Egyptian, had bought him from the hand of the Midianites, had bought him in turn from the Ishmaelites, and had brought him down there. Potiphar bought him because he was attracted to his good looks, but God made Potiphar partially impotent, so that he could not act in his evil intentions. So in other words, this guy was From then on, he became known as Potiphera, Pharaoh, which means mutilated, or Pharaoh, which means a feminine form of his name Potiphar, because he seems to have transgendered. He seems to have transgendered in order to experience to try to experience the fulfillment of his evil intent. So he became impotent. Now, God was with Joseph, and thus he became a successful man. God was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. This over here is the Torah's testimony to Joseph's success. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Nonetheless, he was still a slave, and therefore no means to let his father know that he had no means to let his father know that he was alive. Take a look. Joseph's master saw that Joseph was deeply aware of God's presence, since Joseph always articulated his awareness that it was God who was with him, granting him success in all he did. Potiphar therefore understood that it was God who had granted Joseph success in all that he did. In the Hebrew, there's a lot of commentary in that English translation, but in the Hebrew it says, and his master saw that Hashem was with him, and all that he would do, God would succeed in his hands. So this is the second time in 2 verses where the Torah is testifying that Joseph was successful and that everything that he would do, God would succeed in his hands. Now there is another verse that I want to draw your attention to, because what happened was that his master's wife tried to seduce him. Don't have time to get into that whole story, but when eventually he succeeded in overcoming her evil intentions, he ran away from her, and she was done. She was so angry, hell hath no fury, as a woman scorned, that she turned him into her husband. She blamed him. She blamed him that he tried to rape her, and her husband had him thrown into the dungeon. So here, what happens is he's living in the dungeon, and what happens to him in the dungeon? Let's take a look. Top of page 247. Well, if you look in the middle of page 244, already, just take a look in the middle of 244, beginning of the story. Middle of 244, middle of the page. Joseph's master, who in addition to being the chief butcher, was also in charge of the royal prison, took hold of him and placed him in the prison where the king's prisoners were incarcerated. And he remained in that prison. The scandal became the subject of everyone's gossip. Okay, 247. God was with Joseph and made him well liked amongst the inmates. He also made the warden of the prison favor him. The warden of the prison placed all the prisoners who were in the prison in Joseph's charge, and whatever was done there was done under Joseph's direction. Can you imagine? The guy goes into prison and he becomes the governor of the prison. The macher, yeah. The warden of the prison could not find fault in anything that was under Joseph's charge, for God was with him, and God granted him success in whatever he did. So in the Hebrew now again, the master of the jail didn't bother to worry about any matter in the hands that he gave to the hands of Joseph. He didn't have to second guess anything that he gave Joseph. Why? Because God was with him, and everything that he would do, God succeeded. So you have Joseph clearly as a paradigm of success. And if we're trying to understand how we might be successful and what advice we can give our children and grandchildren as to how they can be successful, what is it that we can draw from this week's Torah portion to be able to learn this lesson? So clearly, I challenge you to find anybody else in Torah that has this kind of testimony, that has this kind of resume, that the Torah testifies that he was successful. You know, there's 2 kinds of success. There is success which is related to a person's efforts. Success which seems to be related to a person's aptitude. And then there's this wondrous form of success which has absolutely nothing to do with a person's abilities. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen people? I mean, when you see a Michael Phelps, remember him, swimmer?
Sure.
When you see a guy, look, I mean, he was always a good swimmer. So, like, does it make sense that he won all those gold medals? Yeah, I mean, the guy's practicing like 8 hours a day, and he was talented. You know, like Lionel Messi, the soccer player. I mean, you look at these guys, it's like, okay, it makes sense. But then you got some people that made so much money, and you look at this guy, this schlemazel, he made all this money. You ever met people like this?
He's our president.
No.
You have people like this.
You're
Yeah,
right.
you have
He
people
is
like
the
this.
president.
No, you look at people like this, and you're like,
So nice to
how on earth? And by the way, these people mix up these two kinds of successes. People with a lot of money, they automatically presume, and other people presume, that the reason they have this money is because they're such a genius. And that's why, you remember Tevye and the Fiddler on the Roof? You remember Tevye and the Fiddler on the Roof? If I were a rich man, he sings over there. They give me a seat, he sings, on the eastern wall, and everybody would be coming to ask my opinion. Reb Tevye, what do you think about this? Reb Tevye, what do you think about that? What should I do? Because I'd be so rich that I'd have such great opinions, right? That's what he sings about in his song, right?
Asking questions that can cross a rabbi's eyes.
Asking questions that can cross a rabbi's eyes. Well said, right? Perfect. So here goes. You've got people that just completely confuse these two kinds of success. And they say, well, if he has a lot of money, it means he's very smart. And you have to ask his opinion, right? Especially the guy himself. Right? He considers himself a very big macher because if I have this money, it means I'm a genius, right? And now some of the dumbest people I know, I hate to say it, they are, of great resources. I'm not saying that everybody I know that is of great resources, but there are some people, and you just wonder, you're left scratching your head, how on earth did this happen, right? So the Torah tells us that there's actually two kinds of successes. There's a success which is related to your aptitude, and then there's a success that has nothing to do with your ability. And if you look at these two verses, you'll see the difference. Look at the first verse again. It was on page 243. I'm not even bothering the English. I'm just going to do it in the Hebrew. 242. 242, verse number 3. It says, "V'chol asher hu oseh, Hashem matzliach biyado." And everything that he does, God succeeds in his hand. Note the word in his hand. So everything he does, God succeeds in his hand. And when you go to the next verse, which is on 246, on the 5th line of the page, it says, "Asher oseh Hashem matzliach," and everything that he does, God succeeds. What's missing in the second time is the word his hand. His hand is missing. The first time it says everything he does, God succeeds in his hand. The second time it says whatever he does, God succeeds. End of sentence, period. What's the difference? When there is in his hand, it's related to his aptitude. When the word his hand is missing, it means that it was nothing to do with his ability. That's how successful he became. Right? It's kind of like we learned in recent weeks when we were learning about this idea of not praying to God to get what you deserve, right? Because if you pray to God to get what you deserve, maybe you're one of the very rare individuals that actually deserve something, but what you're going to get is relative to what you deserve, and that's going to be limited. But if you pray to God to give you based not on what you deserve, but based on what God is capable of giving, now you've just opened yourself up to infinity, right? Because no longer is it limited to my capacity, it's rather limited to God's infinite capacity, and therefore it's unlimited, right? Same thing over here. When God blesses your hand, you experience success that is related to your ability. So if you're good at swimming, or if you're good at soccer, or if you're good at business, or if you're good at building shuls, or whatever it is, then that's your success. Great. But if God is blessing you not based on your ability, but based on his, if God is blessing you without any connection to your hand, now the success is going to be astronomical, even compared to the prior success, right? And these are the two kinds of successes which Joseph actually experiences. The most successful man in Jewish history is experiencing both of these levels of success. First, when he's a slave in his master's house, there he experiences success. He's clearly a skilled manager. He's a skilled manager, transactional attorney. He knows how to negotiate, right? So when he's running his master's house, he's got everything under control. It says everything, his master put him in charge of everything except for the bread that he eats. What is the bread that he eats? Rashi explains, his wife, right? It's a metaphor, it's a euphemism. Yeah, it's a euphemism that a person's sustenance, a person draws his energy from his spouse. If you think about relationships, what do people complain about in relationships? when people have trouble in their relationships. Good morning, Amy from Israel. Shalom Aleichem. Great to see you. When people complain, when spouses complain, it's not about the toilet seat. It's not about the garbage bag. It's not about what he said, what she said. It's about feeling safe. It's about security and feeling like you have what to rely on. And
Synergy.
it's not and not only synergy. I'm gonna propose this based on not my own views, but based on an emerging study, which is called EFT, emotional focused therapy, which is groundbreaking new technology in relationships, where what they're doing is that it's actually not new at all. It's very, very old. And what they're doing is that they're realizing that at the core of every marital argument is a sense of insecurity, a sense of, it's not just a synergy, it's about the fact that the fear that the other person is not going to be the fear to rely on. So really what they want when they're complaining about something, it's not about, don't worry about changing the dance moves. Focus on changing the music. So when marriage is compared to bread, it's because this is what gives us chayis. This is what gives us life. That's our spouse is supposed to give you that kind of life. And that is the kind of success that Joseph was experiencing when he was in his master's house. He was experiencing success based upon his capacity. But later on, when he was in the dungeon, when he was in charge of the jail, there somehow his success becomes zero gravity, nothing related to his ability, but rather it is astronomical, so much greater. And the question we're left with is why? What was it that caused Joseph to reach such astronomical heights? Natalia from Finland, a pleasure to meet you. Beautiful. Yes, what is your
Would
question?
you equate Nelson Mandela's success with Joseph? Would you say there's an analogy?
Why would I do that?
He was in jail for a long time, then he became a leader. just
Many
like
people were
Joseph.
in jail.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
I don't know about that.
I mean, maybe. How about this? How about I give the answer? I share with you the answer, and then you come to your own conclusion. How about that? Maybe. I mean, I think that Joseph. Yeah, whatever. Okay. So I'm not sure why I would do that. Mark, how about the way I look at it is I would like to study the paradigm, and then aspire to the paradigm. If you want to find modern examples, great. But many people sat in jail, so you couldn't, and then became leaders. Okay, so let's go further. So what is it that brought Joseph to success? Well, if you look at the sequence of the events in the longest narrative in the Torah, which is the narrative of Joseph, apparently being in jail was very good for his rise to success. And in fact, being incarcerated seems to have been the cause of his meteoric rise. I mean, the first time round when he became successful in his master's house, he wasn't successful when he was running around with his brothers, telling them his dreams. In fact, he was very unsuccessful then, right? When did he become successful? When he becomes incarcerated in Egypt. It's kind of interesting because Jacob also, in the last week's Torah portion, remember Jacob when he lived in Beersheba, he lived in Israel? He just had an ordinary life. But when he goes out to a faraway place, he wasn't incarcerated. But when he suffered under the tyranny of his father-in-law, of Lavan, that's where he becomes extremely fertile, marries his 4 wives, 11 children, and becomes extremely affluent. So there seems to be a correlation here with discomfort and success. You follow the pattern. And I'm going to share with you this, that if you look at history, and maybe this is what Mark might have been referring to. If you look at history, success seems to always be preceded by distress or failure. Success seems to always be followed by a period. I'm going to call it distress because failure is more specific. Distress is just a general description of like Joseph being incarcerated or Jacob being tormented, abused by his father-in-law. He didn't fail. I wouldn't say that he failed. Jacob didn't fail. Neither did Joseph fail. But they were clearly in a state of acute distress. Yeah.
It seems to me, and please tell me if I'm on the wrong track. that most of us spend most of our lives building ourselves up to be self-sufficient. And at some point, the challenges that occur in life, the things that life throws at us, make us realize that disconnected, we are actually not enough.
To realize that what?
When life challenges us existentially, at some point, either earlier or later, we come to the realization that we are not enough by ourselves.
So you're saying we spend our lives, I'm just going to repeat the question here for our viewers online. So you're saying that we spend our lives trying to become self-sufficient. And then when life sends us a curveball, then what happens? We come to the awareness
Become aware
that we're not
connected from God, we're not enough.
that we're too much disconnected from God, and the self-reliance that we created was actually a fallacy, was actually a mirage, because we cannot actually survive the way we are. Very, very interesting. Okay, so in other words, we tend to build ourselves this sense of I'm going to call them identity enhancers. Identity enhancers, yeah. But yeah, we enhance our identity with our resources, with our cars, with our homes, with our assets, with our investments.
Everybody succeeds that way.
I don't know if everybody succeeds, but at least they aspire to that.
I'm not sure everyone does. I'm not sure everyone does.
All right, let me try to stay focused, guys. Let me try to focus. You want to say? I'm going to get that in a moment.
I'd like to say, but also, it sounds like you have to get out of that comfort zone where you have to challenge yourself. We're always in the comfort zone, and when like for instance,
oh, you got to get out of your comfort zone. Very good.
Yeah.
Now I want to, yeah, very interesting.
Learning Torah, you have to.
So let's just zone in on this idea. Fine, comfort zones, curveballs, right? So here's what happens. Joseph as a template for the Jewish people. Remember, Joseph is not just a story of some guy that lived thousands of years ago. Joseph is a template, like all the patriarchs of our Torah. They serve as templates to our lives, and the reason why the Torah bothers to tell us all the details of their life stories is because they serve as not just lessons, but as life indicators and markers as to how we should live our lives. So you want to experience astronomical success? Great. In order to do that, you're going to have to endure some form of distress. And how do you do that? Sorry, why is it that distress does that to you? Because distress does exactly what you described. You thought that you had reached a state of success. But then the challenge that your success is not able to resolve forces you to seek pastures elsewhere, forcing you to discover the spirituality that you had scorned thus far, right?
David and Goliath book.
David and Goliath book.
People with dyslexics. He talks about all the dyslexics and how guy became the head of Goldman Sachs. I don't know.
So the dyslexics become the most successful leaders. Why? Because they have this insecurity.
They have the insecurity, and then they figure out how to deal with their dyslexia. One of the guys he talks about went to my law school. In 2 years.
Very interesting.
One of the great trial lawyers without being able to basically read.
Right. Very, very interesting. So you say what this means essentially is that I'm going to go in a slightly different direction than what you just said, Harvey. The reason why the distress is the catalyst for success is not only because of what Malcolm Gladwell is saying here, is because you're saying Gladwell is saying that it gives you.
Gladwell's giving an example.
Oh, he's giving an example. Right. Fine. So here, what Chassidus is teaching us is that distress exposes us or forces us to experience humility. And humility is the catalyst for success. That is the answer that the Torah is telling us. If you need to tell your children, grandchildren something that's going to be the secret to their success, I would say to them, make yourself humble before life makes you humble. Because where there's humility, that's where there is the presence of God. Where there is arrogance, you're all on your own. And if you want to experience God's speed in your contracts, in your negotiations, in your encounters, in your dealings, then the way to do that is by experiencing humility. And how do you do humility? You daven 3 times a day, you lay tefillin. I know it's uncomfortable. I know that it takes effort. It's like my son tells me yesterday. He says, Tati, I can't study this, whatever thing that he needs to study because it's too hard. I said, good. Good. If it's too hard, then it means it's going to bring out the best in you. Because if it was easy, I'd be worried that you're not being challenged. The fact that you're being challenged by your Torah study tells me that herein lies the secret to your success. Let me explain in the words of the Mishnah in Ethics of the Fathers. It says, he who accepts upon himself the yoke of Torah will have the yoke of earning a living divested from him. And he who divests of the yoke of Torah will have the yoke of making a living placed upon him. What does that mean? Here you are, you say, listen, I'm too busy. I'm trying to make a living. I don't have time to study with the rabbi, right? I don't have time for this. So I'm going to just worry about making a living. And one day, when I have so much money, I don't have to worry about anything, then I'll come looking for the rabbi. Says Torah, he who divests of the yoke of studying Torah will have the yoke of earning a living placed upon him. But he who has the yoke, who takes upon himself the yoke of Torah study, will have the yoke of earning a living removed from him. Because God doesn't give you burdens for the sake of making your life miserable. God gives you burdens for the sake of making you humble. And if you're able to experience humility through Torah study, then you won't need to experience humility through making a living. But if you don't, that's the example that you said. But if you don't do Torah study, and here you are, you're self-sufficient in your aspiration, and then life gave you that curveball that brought you to the point where you have a problem, and now you're crushed because it's a medical problem that your money can't solve, or a relationship problem that your money can't solve, and now you're forced to discover your spirituality, and now you're being cracked. Your coconut is being cracked with an axe to expose the soft inside. And now Rob is going to ask me a question. So why are there so many Torah scholars that are so poor?
Right, and everyone
Or
everyone around this table is not.
Well, Rabbi, also conversely,
Well, you.
the converse of that is true.
What's the converse of that? Why are there so many people that don't learn Torah?
There are imminently number of successful people.
So first of all, I'm going to ask this
Know what a
question.
Torah is.
First, I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to replace that word rich with happy. For a second. Would you be able to say, would it be fair to say that all those Torah scholars are happy?
No. Otherwise, you wouldn't have Shlava and Shava and all those other.
What?
You know.
I don't know what that is.
It's a organization
For special needs kids?
For abused spouses, most of whom come from.
I've never heard of it. I've never heard of that organization. Seriously. How many?
It's an organization.
How many wealthy people do you know? How many wealthy people do you know that are happy? Wealthy people you know that are happy?
Oh, pretty much most.
Really? Money doesn't make you happy, but it sure helps.
Well,
Somebody once said,
Don't hype, don't
somebody
hype.
said money isn't everything, but it's way ahead of whatever's in second place.
there's the facade of happy, but who knows what's behind the curtain?
Right. Look, this is an interesting discussion,
You're
guys.
straying too far. The question is, the burden of earning a living has not been lifted for many Torah scholars who labor.
So let me put you this.
nothing
Let me
to
comment.
live in
Let me comment on this. A few things. For starters, it says the burden of earning a living. For starters,
Yoke.
the yoke. Now, the word yoke is a very important word because the word yoke makes it very clear that it is something that requires tremendous effort. Now, this is not something subject. There's not a one size fits all kind of thing. It's very subjective. It's extremely subjective. And I would not overgeneralize to say that all religious people are this, or all secular people are that, because I believe that there are secular Jews that push themselves out of their comfort zones in Torah study more than many religious people do. Because for the religious person to study Torah 3 hours a day is actually normal. For the secular person to study Torah 15 seconds to read the rabbi's text message, that's an effort. Right? Because it's very subjective, extremely subjective. The question is, what is for you considered a yoke? And that's why I would not say that it's a catch-all, that anybody who lives in Jerusalem and poor is a conflict to this rule. No. Just because you were pushing yourself in the study of Torah last year, are you pushing yourself in the study of Torah this year? I want to tell you, I was given an offer to take on a very major personal Torah study project. And my first reaction was, I do not have time for this. I do not have time for this. And then I realized this exact idea, that actually the fact that I don't have time for this is the reason why I should do it. That's the reason why I should force myself, because by forcing myself, I will be reinventing my relationship with Torah, because I might have reached a level right now where vis-a-vis myself 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I'm now in a level that I'm pushing myself. No, then I was pushing myself, but now I'm no longer pushing myself, because what was then the revolution has now become the establishment. I'm no longer pushing myself. So I'm no longer experiencing the yoke because I built up my muscles. So now I need a new yoke if I'm going to experience this. You see what I'm saying? It's a real yoke. And that's why it's very subjective. Now, obviously, there are people that are not carrying any yoke whatsoever, and they're still successful,
And they're
right?
happy.
And that's a question that King David, I don't know if they're happy, by the way. I talked to them, trust me. Let me tell you.
Well, I don't know. Maybe the people who have been speaking to you are not happy, but I'm sure there are people
Okay.
who are happy.
Don't be so sure. So,
The yoke
so,
You know,
so,
Isn't the question, rather than judging everyone in the same suit, the question is, like the rabbi you talked about was dying, and they wondered why he was so upset, and said God had one question for him: is he everything that he was supposed to be? Isn't that the question, really?
that's a different question.
Okay.
I'm going to just keep it focused a bit. We're focusing on success, right? What is the secret to success? The secret to success, the Torah is telling us, he who sweats in the study of Torah will not need to sweat in making a living. And conversely, he who does not sweat in the study of Torah will need to sweat in the in making a living. And I challenge you to think about this. I challenge you to think about this. If you're sitting around this table, if you're studying with me right now, you're probably learning more than you did 20 years ago. I'm going to assume that you're learning more than you did 20 years ago. But has this become your status quo? And are you now pushing yourself? So when the guys are around the table, study Chayenu. What's Chayenu? Chayenu is the daily Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya, right? The subscription. If you haven't subscribed, I encourage you to do so. Chayenu.org, CHAYENU.org, and subscribe. And they say to me, people say to me, Rabbi, I tried it, but I was like, yeah, thanks. Oh, Tazay Marty, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. So this is the Chayenu book over here. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. This is Chayenu, right? So you subscribe, it's very good. Now, I want to tell you this. So somebody's going to tell me, some Chacham is going to tell me it's too long for me. He's going to tell me, Rabbi, it doesn't talk to me. It doesn't talk to me. It doesn't inspire me. It's not interesting like when you're talking, they'll tell me. Because it's just, I don't know, the Rashi wrote this 900 years ago. You know what I mean? It doesn't talk to me. That's exactly the point. If you can force yourself to read the daily Chumash with the Rashi, even if it doesn't inspire you, you know what you're doing? You're carrying the yoke. You're studying Torah, not because it's fun. You're studying Torah because this is the will of God. That's what you're doing. And when you do that for the Chumash, and for the Tanya, and for the Tehillim, right? Tehillim. People say to me, Tehillim, I don't understand the words. It doesn't mean anything to me. I'm just reading like a foreign language. Good. That's exactly what I want to hear. I'd be worried if everything that you did in Torah you did because it was inspiring to you, because then you wouldn't be carrying any yoke. This is what it means when it says in the Gemara, such a strange statement. The Torah is not permanent. The Torah doesn't survive, doesn't last, except in a person that kills himself over Torah. This is what I was talking to my 9-year-old about over the weekend. The Torah doesn't endure. That's the word, endure. Except with someone who kills himself over it. So my son is a little confused about this. What?
How does that go over?
Yeah, he didn't take it very well. But obviously the meaning of it is that you got to kill yourself for it. Not kill, but you got to really stress yourself out for it. Exactly. And that's when it endures. Because if you want to experience success, you got to break your humility. You got to break your ego. Ego is the obstruction for success, and humility is the catalyst, is the lightning rod for success. And that's exactly what Joseph goes through. If you look at Joseph's story, he starts off very arrogant. He's walking on the balls of his feet. He's brushing his hair. He's putting what's it called in his eyes? The eyeliners. Eyeliners. Rashi says, if you read the Chayenu, that's what Rashi says. Yesterday's Chayenu, right? He's all over himself, right? Then he gets thrown into the pit. That's one descent. He's humbled. That's not enough.
That's one way to humble you.
Yeah, but that's not enough. Then he gets sold into a caravan. And then he gets sold into another caravan. And then he gets sold into Egypt, and now like he's going down and down and down. And the more he gets sold, the more he gets humbled. But Joseph is a smart cookie. Look at Joseph. What would you do if something like that happened to you? What would happen? How would you react?
Devastated.
You'd be devastated. You'd be running to your psychiatrist. You'd be taking Percocet or something, some antidepressant. Joseph is fully aware. He's fully conscious. He's always in a good mood. He says, God is trying to teach me a lesson. That's what he does. God is trying to teach me a lesson. And if it wasn't bad enough that he's a slave in his master's house, now when his master's wife fails in seducing him and he gets blamed for rape, right? He doesn't go complaining.
Woe is me.
He doesn't say, woe is me. Exactly. What does he do? He's always in a good mood. And now he's in the dungeon and he's making the best of it. Yeah, in the dungeon, I'm going to clean up shop over here, right? It sounds like the group of Hadassah ladies they were on a bus tour somewhere, and the bus fell off a ravine. So all of them, they all died.
How did he do that?
Hang on, the bus driver.
No.
Oh, so hang on. So the bus falls into the ravine, and they go up to heaven, and there was like a backlog. They couldn't process everybody, so they sent them down to hell for a while, just to, because there was room in the waiting room.
Yeah.
So after 15 minutes, the angel calls from downstairs from the basement from hell, and he calls the front desk and says, "Please, can you get these ladies out of here? They're already running a fundraiser to put an air conditioning in the whole hell."
There you go. That's good.
So Joseph, what does he do? He how does he keep a proper mindset? Because his faith is strong. And he doesn't believe in idols. Joseph doesn't believe that Potiphar had power over him. He doesn't believe that his brothers had power over him. He doesn't believe that the jail warden had power over him. Joseph believes in one God, always, without any exception whatsoever. Right? Not even the president of the United States had power over him. Right? He believed only in the power of God Almighty and nothing else. And therefore, if God put me here, then this is where I need to be right now. And what's the lesson? He says, well, it's pretty humbling. So I'm going to be humbled. That's what he's dealing with, right?
But he starts out not being humble.
That's right.
By
That's why he needed the lesson.
By telling everyone, they're going to bow down.
That's exactly the point. If he started humble, he wouldn't need to be thrown into the pit.
Aha.
That's my whole point.
Azoi.
That's right. He started off as an arrogant, you know what, right? Very good. And that's why it says in the verse in Tehillah, in Isaiah, it says, and who shall I focus on, says God. I'm sorry, I'm going so long. Who shall I focus on, says God? On the poor and broken of spirit. The poor man broken of spirit. That's the one that I'm going to bless, to be with. Now, the Christians interpret this verse as somehow saying that the rich man is a sinner and it's a virtue to be poor. Torah says, forget about it. That's not the point. The point is to be fabulously wealthy and to still be humble. That's what Isaiah is talking about. To be able to daven 3 times a day and to say, you know what? It doesn't actually suit my schedule to come to shul twice a day. And it doesn't suit my arrangement to study Torah here and there and the other. And you know what? I could be using the money for something else, but I'm using it for tzedakah. By you doing the 613 commandments, you are doing an act of humbling yourself. Because what you're doing is that you're humbling your desire for the desire of God. And when you do that, it's then that you experience more and more and more success, even deeper, greater points of success like Joseph, till he reaches the point that he stands before Pharaoh. And think about it, Joseph actually becomes the most powerful person in the history of the Jewish people. How does he do that? He becomes the prime minister of the superpower of the world. Right? That's later on in the Torah, right? How does he do that? Because he had successfully accessed those levels of humility. If we can only be smart enough to do the same, to be able to discover those depths of humility within ourselves. You can look at your grandchildren and say, be a tough cookie. Don't let anybody cross your path. Be cutthroat in your negotiations. That's one way of doing business. Or you can say, be cutthroat in your negotiations, but always put Hashem first. Always put God before you. And if you could do that, God will be with you. Yeah.
So when we're humble, do we connect with our God soul as opposed to our animal soul?
For sure. Your animal soul is the paradigm, a poster child of conceit.
And is that the way to do it?
Absolutely. Because if you're working with the animal soul, then you'll be as successful as your animal soul's capacity. But if you're working with your godly soul, then you have no limitless capacity. Yeah.
But isn't success in and of itself the fact that you are humble and that you have the belief, and therefore to measure it by what material possessions is really not the issue or the question, or not the measure. In other words, Joseph would have been just as righteous, just as successful because of his strong belief in God, even if he had not become the most powerful person in Egypt, even if he had not accumulated all this wealth. Why do you have to look at it that? Why don't you just say that the success is in the fact that he was who he was?
So I'm going to tell you this, Rob, that Rob is asking a question. Why do we have to connect it to money all the time? Right?
Or material.
Yeah, let's talk stuff and tish. Why do we have to talk about money? Let it be just he was spiritually happy and finished, right? Because the importance of this is so critical that our very money depends upon it. That's how critical it is. People, it's easy to draw a wedge and say, you know what, I got two lives. There's my spiritual life, and then there's my real life. Right? But what's happening here is that your humility before God, your ability to walk humbly before God is so critical that is actually what powers your real life, which is your Main Street, your Wall Street, your boardroom, and your bank account. It actually affects and deeply impacts that success. That secret of success is your spiritual life. It's not two lanes. It's not two lives that you have. It's not a binary. It is one holistic view of life, which manifests when something is true. It manifests from the top to the bottom.
No, but I think I just answered my first question, which is why are there so many poor yeshiva workers? The answer is they're not poor. They have reached their success.
Yes.
The material, the fact that they live in a one-room apartment and can barely make a material living is irrelevant.
So what?
They reached exactly. So what? They've reached their level of success.
But I caution you from judging whether they. I caution you from judging whether somebody who's a yeshiva bacher is truly humbling himself before God. I know many yeshiva bachers that are conceited to kazoo.
Right.
Okay, and I know you can't do that. You can't do that. There are many rabbis that are arrogant, and there are many rabbis that are humble. There are many lawyers that are honest, and many lawyers that are liars. Right? So you really can't overgeneralize with that. But that's a very, very important message, folks. And I'm gonna sign off over here. We'll carry on offline. Thank you very much.
Now, we're studying Torah,